the dead of night, Olivia Mitchell faced a decision no one her age should ever have to make. Outside her window, flames devoured her neighbor's house, the roar of the fire drowning out her racing thoughts. She could wait for help to arrive, or risk her life to save the elderly man she knew was trapped inside. Her heart pounded as she stood on the threshold of danger, torn between fear and the unshakable pull of her conscience. What she did next would ignite a chain of events that no one, least of all Olivia, could have foreseen. Before we dive into this gripping story of courage, community, and transformation, comment below with where you're watching from today. If this incredible tale of bravery inspires you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss stories like this. Olivia Mitchell was no stranger to hard work. In her small, tight-knit neighborhood on the edge of the city, where cracked sidewalks and faded storefronts spoke of struggles endured over decades, Olivia's days were a whirlwind of responsibilities. The sun hadn't even begun to rise when her alarm clock buzzed each morning. Rolling out of bed, she quickly tidied up her room before heading to the kitchen. Her younger siblings, Alex and Mia, relied on her to make breakfast, pack lunches, and ensure they were ready for school. With her mom working late-night shifts as a nurse, the weight of keeping their little family running smoothly often fell on Olivia's shoulders. Still, she never complained. She moved through her routine with quiet efficiency, always finding time to sprinkle in moments of kindness, a reassuring word to Mia, who struggled with her math homework, or an encouraging pep talk for Alex before his soccer tryouts. Her family was her anchor, and though they didn't have much, they had each other. After rushing her siblings out the door and walking them to the bus stop, Olivia sprinted to catch her own bus to school. Her days at Jefferson High were equally demanding. Balancing her studies, extracurricular activities, and tutoring sessions for younger students left her little free time. Yet Olivia thrived in the chaos, her sights set firmly on the future. She dreamed of becoming a doctor, a goal she nurtured not just for herself, but for the community that had shaped her. In the afternoons, Olivia often volunteered at the local food bank, organizing donations and handing out supplies with a warm smile. On weekends, she tutored neighborhood kids struggling with their studies. Her small acts of service earned her a reputation in the community. She was the girl with the big heart, always ready to lend a hand despite the challenges she faced. But dreams, Olivia knew, came at a cost. Her family's budget was stretched thin, and scholarships were her only hope of affording college. Every evening, she pored over her textbooks, applying for every scholarship she could find. She knew the odds were slim, but she held on to hope, driven by a determination that burned brighter than the streetlights outside her window. Still, Olivia's neighborhood wasn't without its struggles. The streets buzzed with life and laughter, but behind the cheerful facades were families fighting to stay afloat. The occasional sound of sirens cutting through the night was a stark reminder of the hardships many faced. Olivia had grown up seeing the resilience of her neighbors, watching them support one another through thick and thin. She believed in their strength, and it only fueled her desire to give back. Her kindness and dedication stood out, a beacon of hope in a place where hope sometimes felt like a luxury. But even Olivia couldn't have foreseen how drastically her life was about to change. One ordinary evening, as she sat at her small desk immersed in biology notes, an unfamiliar scent wafted through her open window. She paused, sniffing the air. It was faint at first, musky and acrid, but it quickly grew stronger. Olivia furrowed her brow, glancing toward the street below. That's when she saw it, a faint orange glow flickering against the night sky. Book back. Her heart skipped a beat. Olivia leaned closer to the window, her stomach knotting with unease. The faint glow she'd noticed moments ago was now unmistakable. Flames were licking hungrily at the silhouette of a small house down the street. Her breath caught as she realized whose house it was. "Mr. Carter," she whispered, panic surging through her. Mr. Carter was an elderly man who had lived in the neighborhood for as long as Olivia could remember. Quiet and reserved, he mostly kept to himself. But he'd always been kind. He often stopped to chat with Olivia when she helped him carry groceries from the corner store, always asking about her studies and encouraging her to keep chasing her dreams. Without a second thought, Olivia grabbed her phone, her fingers fumbling as she dialed 911. 911. What's your emergency? A calm voice answered. There's a fire at my neighbor's house, Olivia stammered, giving the operator the address as quickly as she could. Her words tumbled over one another as she explained the situation. Help is on the way, the operator assured her. But as Olivia hung up, her eyes remained locked on the growing inferno. The flames were spreading fast, consuming the old wooden structure with terrifying speed. Her chest tightened as she thought of Mr. Carter. What if he was still inside? The rational part of her mind screamed at her to stay put, to let the firefighters handle it. She thought of her siblings, asleep just down the hall, and her mother, who was still at work. What if something happened to her? But then, she thought of Mr. Carter. The way he always smiled at her, his gentle encouragement when she felt overwhelmed by her studies. She could almost hear his voice. You've got so much potential, Olivia. Never stop believing in yourself. A wave of resolve washed over her. Grabbing a sweatshirt to cover her face, she bolted out of the house. The cool night air hit her like a slap, but she barely noticed as she sprinted down the street. Around her, neighbors were beginning to emerge from their homes, their faces masks of confusion and fear. Some called out to her, but Olivia didn't stop to answer. As she neared Mr. Carter's house, the heat was almost unbearable. Sweat beaded on her forehead, mingling with the smoke in the air. She hesitated for the briefest moment, her hand hovering over the doorknob. This was her last chance to turn back, to wait for the professionals who would surely arrive any second. But then she heard it, a faint, raspy cough coming from somewhere inside. Mr. Carter, she yelled, her voice hoarse. The cough came again, weaker this time, and Olivia knew she couldn't wait. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the door open. A wall of black smoke greeted her, stinging her eyes and searing her lungs. She dropped to her knees, remembering something she'd read about staying low to avoid the thickest smoke. The familiar layout of Mr. Carter's house was now a disorienting maze of shadows and danger. Mr. Carter, she called again, crawling forward cautiously. A creak from above made her freeze. She glanced up just in time to see a section of the ceiling buckle under the heat. It crashed down behind her, sending a shower of sparks into the room. Her pulse pounded in her ears. This wasn't like the heroic rescues in movies. This was raw, real, and terrifying. But she couldn't give up. Driven by determination stronger than her fear, Olivia inched forward, her hands brushing against furniture she couldn't see through the haze. Finally, she heard it again, a faint cough, closer now. She followed the sound to the kitchen. There, huddled in a corner, was Mr. Carter. His face was streaked with soot, his eyes glassy and unfocused. Relief flooded through Olivia, but it was short-lived. Mr. Carter, it's me, Olivia, she said, grabbing his arm. We have to get out of here. The old man nodded weakly, leaning heavily on her as she helped him to his feet. Together, they stumbled toward the exit, Olivia guiding him as quickly as she could manage. Each step felt like a lifetime, the heat and smoke clawing at her with relentless intensity. Her lungs burned, desperate for clean air, but she refused to let go of Mr. Carter. Just when she thought her legs might give out, a burst of fresh air hit her face. They had made it. They collapsed onto the lawn, both gasping for breath as neighbors and firefighters rushed toward them. Olivia rolled onto her back, staring up at the night sky as relief swept over her. She had done it. Mr. Carter was alive. Paramedics swarmed around them, checking for injuries. Olivia turned her head to see Mr. Carter being loaded onto a stretcher. Despite the oxygen mask covering his face, his eyes found hers. The gratitude in his gaze said more than words ever could. As the paramedics prepared to take him to the hospital, Olivia sat up, coughing into her sleeve. Her body trembled with exhaustion, but she felt a deep sense of peace. Whatever the consequences, she had made the right choice. Bookmark, she had saved a life. The chaos of the night had begun to settle, but Olivia's mind raced with everything that had just happened. Sitting on the curb, wrapped in a blanket handed to her by a paramedic, she stared at the still smoldering ruins of Mr. Carter's house. Flames no longer roared, but the thick smell of smoke hung heavy in the air, a haunting reminder of the destruction. Around her, neighbors gathered in small groups, whispering about what had unfolded. Most had watched in awe as Olivia carried Mr. Carter out of the inferno. Now their voices were filled with a mix of disbelief and admiration. "She didn't even wait for the firefighters," someone murmured. "She just ran in there like a real hero," another replied. The words felt distant to Olivia, her exhaustion weighing on her like a heavy blanket. She couldn't quite process the enormity of it all. She didn't feel like a hero, just a girl who had acted on instinct. A familiar voice cut through the hum of the crowd. "Olivia!" Her mother, Deborah, rushed toward her, her face pale with worry and streaked with tears. She dropped to her knees beside Olivia, pulling her into a fierce embrace. "Oh, thank God you're okay," Deborah whispered, her voice trembling. "What were you thinking? Running into that fire? You could have been killed." "I had to, Mom," Olivia replied softly, her voice hoarse from the smoke. "He was in there. I couldn't just stand by." Deborah pulled back, holding her daughter's face in her hands. Her expression was a mix of fear, relief, and something else, pride. She opened her mouth to speak but was interrupted by a police officer approaching with a notepad. "Miss Mitchell?" he asked gently, glancing at Deborah before focusing on Olivia. "Can you tell us what happened tonight?" Olivia nodded, taking a deep breath to steady herself. She recounted the events as best she could. The smell of smoke, the sight of the flames, her decision to enter the house. Her voice wavered in places, and she had to pause to collect herself when she described finding Mr. Carter in the kitchen. As she spoke, the crowd around her grew. Neighbors listened intently, their expressions ranging from astonishment to admiration. Among them was Mrs. Thompson, the elderly woman who lived next door. She had always been fond of Olivia, often offering her cookies or a cup of tea when she passed by. Now, Mrs. Thompson's eyes were wide with a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. When Olivia finished her account, Mrs. Thompson stepped forward, her voice shaking with emotion. "You're a hero, Olivia," she said, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "What you did tonight? It's beyond brave." Others in the crowd nodded in agreement, their murmurs of praise growing louder. Olivia felt her cheeks flush under their attention. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight, and the word hero felt almost too big, too heavy for what she had done. "I just did what anyone would do," she mumbled, looking down at her soot-streaked hands. But Mrs. Thompson shook her head. "No, dear, not everyone would have done what you did. Most would have waited for help. You risked your life to save someone else. That makes you special." Deborah, still sitting beside Olivia, squeezed her hand. "She's right," she said softly. "What you did took courage, Olivia. You should be proud of yourself." The praise continued to flow, but Olivia found it hard to fully absorb. She was grateful for their kind words, of course, but deep down, she felt conflicted. All she had done was act on instinct, driven by the thought of Mr. Carter trapped inside. Wasn't that just human? As the crowd began to disperse, Olivia stayed seated on the curb, staring at the blackened remains of Mr. Carter's home. The firefighters were still working, ensuring the blaze was completely extinguished and that no embers remained. Mrs. Thompson returned with a steaming mug of tea, pressing it into Olivia's trembling hands. "Here, dear," she said with a kind smile. "You've had quite a night." Olivia accepted the tea gratefully, the warmth spreading through her fingers. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice still raw. "What you did was incredibly brave," Mrs. Thompson continued, sitting down beside her. "You may not see it now, but you've made a difference tonight. You've reminded all of us what it means to care for one another." Olivia shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to respond. She had always believed in helping others. It was simply the way she was raised. Her mother had always taught her that kindness was the foundation of community, and Olivia had taken those lessons to heart. "I just did what needed to be done," Olivia said finally, her eyes fixed on the tea in her hands. Mrs. Thompson patted her shoulder gently. "Sometimes, dear, that's all it takes to be a hero." As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, the neighborhood slowly came back to life. The smell of smoke still lingered in the air, and the sight of Mr. Carter's charred house was a stark reminder of the night's events. Olivia sat on her porch, wrapped in a blanket, her mind replaying the events over and over. Her siblings were still asleep inside, blissfully unaware of the chaos that had unfolded. Her mother sat beside her, a hand resting on her shoulder. "The fire chief said Mr. Carter's going to be okay," Deborah said quietly. They're keeping him at the hospital for observation, but he should be out soon. Olivia let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That's good, she said, a small smile tugging at her lips. He asked about you, Deborah continued. Wanted to make sure you were all right. Olivia nodded, touched by his concern. Mr. Carter had always been kind to her, but she hadn't realized just how much he cared. There's something else, Deborah added, her voice lowering. The fire chief mentioned that Mr. Carter seemed different, like he was trying to tell them something but couldn't quite get the words out. Olivia frowned, her brow furrowing. Different how? I'm not sure, Deborah said, shaking her head. But I have a feeling there's more to Mr. Carter than we know. Olivia didn't respond, her thoughts drifting. Exhaustion was beginning to catch up with her, and as she leaned back against the porch railing, she felt her eyes grow heavy. The night's events had left her shaken, but one thing was clear. This was only the beginning of a story she could never have imagined. The days following the fire were a blur for Olivia. News of her daring rescue spread quickly, and she found herself the reluctant center of attention. Neighbors stopped by to offer their thanks and admiration, each visit bringing fresh waves of embarrassment. Her siblings, Alex and Mia, were starry-eyed with awe, proudly telling anyone who would listen, "Our sister's a hero." Olivia tried to brush off the title, insisting she'd only done what needed to be done. But deep down, she couldn't deny the small flicker of pride she felt at their words. She spent her time trying to return to a sense of normalcy, attending classes, volunteering at the food bank, and working on her scholarship applications. Yet no matter how hard she tried to focus, her mind kept wandering back to Mr. Carter. She hadn't been able to visit him at the hospital, but she'd heard he was recovering well. She wondered if he was thinking about the fire as much as she was. Early one morning, just as the household was settling into its usual rhythm, a sharp knock at the door shattered the quiet. Olivia, still in her pajamas, exchanged a curious glance with her mother, who went to answer. When Deborah opened the door, her expression shifted to one of surprise. Standing there was Mr. Carter, looking remarkably well for someone who had so recently escaped a burning building. His face was still slightly pale, but his eyes were bright and clear. Beside him was a man in a neatly tailored suit, holding a leather briefcase. "Mr. Carter," Deborah exclaimed, stepping aside to let them in. "Please, come in." As the two men entered, Olivia's heart began to race. She couldn't shake the feeling that this visit wasn't just a friendly check-in. "Good morning," Mr. Carter said warmly, his voice steady but carrying a note of emotion. His gaze found Olivia, and a smile spread across his face. "There she is, my guardian angel." Olivia blushed, ducking her head. "I'm glad you're okay, Mr. Carter," she said softly. They all settled into the modest living room, the air buzzing with anticipation. Mr. Carter sat in the armchair opposite Olivia, his companion standing nearby with a professional yet reassuring demeanor. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened that night," Mr. Carter began, his voice steady but earnest. "Olivia, you saved my life. If it hadn't been for you, I don't think I'd be here today." "You don't have to thank me," Olivia replied quickly, feeling the familiar discomfort of being praised. "I just did what anyone would have done." Mr. Carter chuckled, shaking his head. "That's what makes you special. You don't even realize how extraordinary you are. But this visit isn't just about expressing my gratitude. There's something I need to tell you." Deborah and Olivia exchanged puzzled glances, their curiosity piqued. Mr. Carter leaned forward slightly, his gaze soft but resolute. "You've known me as a quiet old man who keeps to himself, but there's more to my story than you might think. Before I retired, I ran a global business, a company I built from the ground up. When I sold it, I stepped away from the spotlight, choosing to settle down here where I grew up." Olivia blinked, her mind struggling to reconcile this revelation with the kindly but unassuming neighbor she'd known. "You ran a business?" "Yes, and it did quite well," Mr. Carter said with a small smile. "In fact, I sold the company for more than 8 figures. Deborah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Olivia sat frozen, unsure what to say. "For years I've kept a low profile, living a quiet life," Mr. Carter continued. "But your act of bravery reminded me of something important. The responsibility we have to give back, to nurture potential. And Olivia, you are full of potential." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. "I want to help you achieve your dreams," Mr. Carter said, his tone resolute. "I've already spoken to my lawyer, and I'm prepared to establish a trust fund that will cover all your educational expenses. You'll be able to attend any university you choose, without worrying about the cost." The room fell silent, the weight of his offer sinking in. Olivia's mouth opened, but no words came out. Her mother was the first to recover. "Mr. Carter, this is incredibly generous," Deborah said, her voice thick with emotion. "But it's too much. We can't." "Please," Mr. Carter interrupted gently, holding up a hand. "This isn't charity. It's an investment in Olivia's future and her potential to do great things. She's already proven her character and her courage. I want to make sure she has the chance to reach her full potential." Olivia finally found her voice, though it was barely above a whisper. "I don't know what to say. This is unbelievable, but I can't accept something like this." Mr. Carter's expression softened. "You risked your life for me without hesitation. Let me do this for you, Olivia. It's the least I can do." Deborah placed a hand on Olivia's arm, her eyes glistening with tears. "Sweetheart, this is a blessing. Don't let pride keep you from accepting it. Think of what this could mean for your future." Olivia looked between her mother and Mr. Carter, her mind racing. She thought of her dreams of becoming a doctor, of the countless nights spent worrying about how she'd afford college. This could change everything. With trembling hands, she nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Carter," she said, her voice barely steady. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "You don't need to," Mr. Carter replied with a smile. "Your actions spoke louder than any words ever could." The lawyer, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward. "We'll take care of all the legal details to ensure everything is transparent and properly managed," he explained. "This is just the beginning, Olivia. The possibilities ahead are endless." As the conversation shifted to logistics, Olivia felt as though the ground beneath her had shifted. This moment marked the start of a new chapter in her life, one she never could have anticipated. Bookmark? Yet even as excitement and gratitude swirled within her, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered a question she couldn't ignore. How would this change her? In the days that followed Mr. Carter's astonishing visit, Olivia's life began to change in ways she hadn't anticipated. The offer of a trust fund and the opportunity to attend any university in the country was overwhelming. It was a gift that held the power to transform her life completely, and she could feel the weight of its significance pressing on her shoulders. At school, the news of her heroic act had spread like wildfire. Teachers and classmates alike looked at her with newfound admiration, their whispers trailing her in the hallways. "That's Olivia Mitchell? She's the one who ran into a burning house. I heard she saved Mr. Carter's life." Though she tried to focus on her classes, Olivia felt the constant buzz of attention distracting her. It was strange to be at the center of so much praise, and she wasn't sure how to handle it. After all, she hadn't done it for recognition. She'd simply done what she believed was right. One afternoon, as she packed up her books after class, her biology teacher, Mrs. Patel, approached her. "Olivia," she said warmly, "I just wanted to tell you how proud we all are of you. What you did for Mr. Carter was incredibly brave." "Thank you, Mrs. Patel," Olivia replied, ducking her head shyly. "I also heard about Mr. Carter's scholarship offer," Mrs. Patel continued, her eyes twinkling. "You've always been one of the brightest students in this school, and now you have the chance to truly shine. I hope you know how much potential you have." Those words lingered in Olivia's mind as she walked home that day. Potential. It was a word she'd heard often from her teachers, and even Mr. Carter, but now it felt more tangible than ever. For the first time, her dreams of becoming a doctor didn't feel so out of reach. At home, the changes were just as profound. For years, the Mitchell family had lived with a constant undercurrent of stress, with Deborah working long hours to make ends meet and Olivia balancing her responsibilities at home with her studies. But now, with Mr. Carter's trust fund set up, the burden seemed to lift ever so slightly. Deborah was able to cut back on her overtime shifts, spending more evenings at home with Alex and Mia. For Olivia, this small change made a world of difference. She hadn't realized how much she missed her mother's presence until now. "Mom," Olivia said one evening as they sat together at the kitchen table, I feel like everything's happening so fast. It's amazing, but I'm scared too. What if I mess this up? Deborah reached across the table, taking her daughter's hand. Sweetheart, you've already proven how strong and capable you are. This is your time to dream big and go after what you want. And remember, you're not alone. We're all here to support you. Her mother's words gave Olivia a renewed sense of determination. That night, she sat down with her textbooks and began planning out the next steps in her academic journey. Olivia's days soon became a flurry of activity. With Mr. Carter's encouragement, she enrolled in advanced placement classes and sought out additional tutoring to prepare for college entrance exams. Her evenings were spent filling out applications, writing essays, and researching universities. Through it all, Mr. Carter remained a constant presence in her life. He visited often, offering advice and sharing stories from his own journey. Though he had once seemed like a quiet and mysterious figure, Olivia now saw him in a new light. He was a man of wisdom and kindness, with a deep desire to see her succeed. Success isn't just about hard work, Mr. Carter told her during one of their conversations. It's about staying true to who you are and using your success to uplift others. Never forget where you came from, Olivia. Those words stuck with her. As Olivia threw herself into her studies, she also found ways to give back to her community. She started tutoring younger students at the community center, just as she had done before. But now, her perspective was different. Education is your key to the future, she told the small group of students gathered around her one afternoon. It's not just about grades, it's about opening doors you didn't even know were there. The students hung on her every word, their eyes wide with hope and curiosity. Olivia couldn't help but smile, seeing herself reflected in their eager faces. The community, inspired by Olivia's actions and the changes in her life, began to rally together. People who had once only exchanged polite hellos started forming deeper connections, working together to improve the neighborhood. There was a newfound sense of hope that hadn't existed before, and Olivia's story was at the heart of it. Months passed, and Olivia's hard work began to pay off. She received acceptance letters from several universities, including one of her top choices, a prestigious program with a strong focus on medicine. The letter arrived on a crisp spring morning, and as she read the words, her heart swelled with emotion. "Mom, I got it," she shouted, running into the living room where Deborah was folding laundry. Her mother dropped the shirt she was holding, her face breaking into a wide smile. "Oh, Olivia, I'm so proud of you," she exclaimed, pulling her daughter into a tight hug. The news spread quickly, and before long, the entire neighborhood knew about Olivia's achievement. Mr. Carter was the first to congratulate her, his eyes shining with pride. "I always knew you'd do it," he said, his voice filled with warmth. "This is just the beginning, Olivia." Yet even as Olivia prepared to embark on this new chapter, she couldn't help but think of her roots. She knew she was stepping into a world vastly different from the one she'd grown up in, and a part of her worried about losing touch with the people and the place that had shaped her. But she also understood that her success wasn't just for her. It was for her family, her community, and everyone who had believed in her along the way. Late one evening, as she walked through the neighborhood, Olivia paused outside the remains of Mr. Carter's house. The charred structure had been cleared away, but the lot stood empty, a stark reminder of how everything had begun. She closed her eyes, imagining the future she was working toward. She pictured herself in a white coat, working in a bustling hospital, and then returning to her community to give back in any way she could. "I won't forget," she whispered to herself, a quiet promise that carried on the night breeze. As Olivia continued to prepare for the next chapter of her life, something remarkable was happening in the heart of her neighborhood. The lot where Mr. Carter's house once stood had been cleared, leaving a blank slate, a canvas waiting for new possibilities. One sunny afternoon, Mr. Carter called Olivia and her family to meet him at the site. Deborah, Alex, and Mia followed Olivia down the street, curious about what he wanted to show them. When they arrived, Mr. Carter was standing in the middle of the empty lot, wearing a satisfied smile. Beside him was a group of architects and contractors, holding blueprints and discussing plans. "What's going on, Mr. Carter?" Olivia asked, her curiosity piqued. Mr. Carter gestured to the plans in the architect's hands. I've been thinking a lot about what this neighborhood means to me and how much potential it has. This place shaped who I am, and it's time I gave something back. So, I've decided to build something for the community, a center where kids can learn, play, and grow. Olivia's eyes widened. You're building a community center? That's right, Mr. Carter said with a nod. It'll have classrooms, a library, a computer lab, and even a recreational area. This will be a place where kids can dream big and work toward their futures, just like you've been doing. Deborah placed a hand over her heart, her voice thick with emotion. That's incredible, Mr. Carter. This neighborhood could really use a space like that. Mr. Carter's eyes twinkled as he looked at Olivia. And I was hoping you'd help me get it started. You know better than anyone what this community needs. Olivia felt a swell of pride and gratitude. Of course, I'll help. This is amazing, Mr. Carter. Thank you for doing this. Construction began quickly, and as the foundation was laid and walls began to rise, the excitement in the neighborhood grew. Every day, people stopped by to check on the progress, eager to see how the space would take shape. Olivia became a regular fixture at the site, meeting with Mr. Carter and the architects to discuss ideas. She suggested programs for tutoring and mentoring, activities that could inspire kids to aim higher and dream bigger. I want this to be a place where everyone feels welcome, Olivia said one day, sitting with Mr. Carter as they reviewed the plans. A space where no one feels like they're alone, no matter what challenges they're facing. Mr. Carter nodded. That's the spirit we're building here, Olivia, and it's because of you that this idea came to life. Months later, the community center was finally complete. It stood as a shining beacon of hope in the neighborhood, its freshly painted walls gleaming in the sunlight. A large sign above the entrance read, Carter Community Center, a place to dream. The grand opening drew a crowd that spilled onto the sidewalk. Neighbors, local officials, and even news crews gathered to celebrate the milestone. Olivia stood beside Mr. Carter at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, her heart swelling with pride as she looked out at the sea of smiling faces. When it was her turn to speak, Olivia stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly as she held the microphone. This center isn't just a building, she began, her voice steady despite her nerves. It's a symbol of what we can accomplish when we come together as a community. It's a place where kids can learn, grow, and build a brighter future. And it's a reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness can spark something much bigger. The crowd erupted into applause, and Olivia felt a wave of warmth wash over her. She had always believed in the power of community, but standing here, she could see it manifesting in ways she had never imagined. The Carter Community Center quickly became the heart of the neighborhood. Inside, the classrooms buzzed with activity. In one room, a group of children sat around a table, their faces scrunched in concentration as they worked through math problems. Olivia led the session, her voice clear and confident as she explained concepts that had once seemed impossible to her. Remember, she said, pointing to the equation on the board, math isn't about memorizing formulas. It's about learning how to solve problems, and that's a skill you can use in the real world. The kids nodded eagerly, their eyes shining with understanding. In another part of the center, a group of teenagers worked on computers, learning coding and digital design. Volunteers from the neighborhood offered classes in art, music, and even cooking, making the center a hub for creativity and learning. Olivia often found herself marveling at how much the center had transformed the community. It wasn't just a place for kids. It was a space where parents could connect, where neighbors could come together to share ideas and support one another. One evening, as Olivia was wrapping up a tutoring session, she noticed Mr. Carter standing in the doorway, watching her with a proud smile. "You've come a long way, Olivia," he said as they walked through the bustling hallways. "How does it feel to see this place thriving?" "It's overwhelming," Olivia admitted, pausing to take in the vibrant energy around her. "But in a good way. I feel like we're really making a difference." Mr. Carter nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You are. And it's only the beginning. The impact you're having on these kids is going to ripple out in ways you can't even imagine yet." Olivia smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. For the first time, She truly believed in her ability to inspire change. Though Olivia's days were busier than ever, she made time to walk through her neighborhood, reconnecting with the streets and people she had grown up with. One evening, she spotted a young girl helping an elderly neighbor carry groceries, a scene that mirrored her own childhood. The sight made Olivia pause, her heart swelling with emotion. She thought back to the moment she decided to run into Mr. Carter's burning house, unaware of how it would set off a chain of events that would transform not only her life, but the lives of so many others. This neighborhood had given her so much, and now she was giving back in ways she'd never dreamed possible. Olivia's life had settled into a new rhythm. Days were filled with tutoring sessions, community events, and late-night study marathons as she prepared for college. The Carter Community Center had become a beacon of hope, bustling with activity and drawing in people from all corners of the neighborhood. One evening, as Olivia finished a meeting about expanding the center's programs, she overheard a conversation that stopped her in her tracks. "I never thought I'd be good at this coding stuff," said a boy named Marcus, one of the teens in the computer lab, "but Miss Olivia said I could, and now I'm thinking about studying it in college. She's the reason I started coming here." Another voice chimed in. "If she can do all this, maybe I can too." Olivia lingered in the hallway, her heart swelling at their words. She had never set out to be a role model, but hearing how her actions were inspiring others made her realize just how far-reaching the impact of one moment could be. Meanwhile, her own preparations for college were progressing rapidly. Olivia had chosen to attend a prestigious university with a strong pre-med program, thanks to Mr. Carter's generous scholarship. She was excited but also nervous about leaving the neighborhood that had shaped her. "Do you think they'll treat me differently?" she asked her mother one evening as they packed up her things. "Who's they?" Deborah asked with a teasing smile. "The people at college," Olivia said. "I mean, I'll be coming from a place like this, and they'll probably come from, well, places like that." Deborah set down the stack of books she was holding and took Olivia's hands. "Listen to me, Olivia. You belong there just as much as anyone else. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise, and no matter where you go, you'll always have this community behind you." Her mother's words stayed with Olivia as her move-in day approached. The day Olivia left for college was bittersweet. Neighbors gathered on her front porch to say goodbye, offering hugs, advice, and even a few homemade care packages. "We're so proud of you," Mrs. Thompson said, tears glistening in her eyes. "You're going to do great things, Olivia." Mr. Carter was there too, standing a little apart from the crowd. As Olivia approached him, he smiled warmly. "This is just the beginning, you know," he said. "You've already made such a difference here, and now you're going to take that spirit out into the world." Olivia nodded, her eyes misting. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Mr. Carter. Thank you for believing in me." He shook his head. "The belief was always in you, Olivia. I just helped you see it." Life at university was a whirlwind. Olivia threw herself into her studies, determined to make the most of the opportunities she'd been given. She joined pre-med organizations, attended guest lectures, and spent late nights in the library poring over anatomy textbooks. But no matter how busy she was, she never forgot her roots. She called home regularly, updating her family and Mr. Carter on her progress. She also stayed involved with the Carter Community Center, mentoring students virtually and offering guidance whenever she could. "Don't forget," she told one of her mentees during a video call, "it's not just about what you achieve. It's about how you use what you've learned to help others." As Olivia's first year at college drew to a close, she returned home for the summer, eager to reconnect with her community. The Carter Community Center was thriving in her absence, with new programs and even more participants. Walking through its halls, Olivia marveled at how much it had grown. One day, as she led a workshop on goal setting for a group of teens, a young girl named Sophia raised her hand. "Miss Olivia," she began hesitantly, "how did you know you wanted to be a doctor?" Olivia smiled, thinking back to her own journey. "I guess it started with wanting to help people," she said. "But it really became clear to me when I realized how much one act of kindness can change someone's life. That's what medicine is. It's about helping people when they need it most." Sophia nodded, her eyes bright with understanding. "I want to be like you someday," she said quietly. Olivia's chest tightened at the girl's words. She had once been Sophia, looking up to people who inspired her and hoping to make a difference. Now, she was the one inspiring others, a realization that filled her with both pride and humility. That summer, Olivia noticed something else about her neighborhood. It wasn't just the community center that had changed, it was the people. There was a sense of connection and purpose that hadn't been there before. A collective belief in the power of working together. Neighbors who had once kept to themselves were now organizing block cleanups, hosting potlucks, and volunteering at the center. The ripple effect of Mr. Carter's generosity and Olivia's courage was evident in every corner of the community. One evening, as Olivia walked past the community garden that had been planted in the lot next to the center, she saw a group of children laughing as they watered the plants. Nearby, a few older residents were chatting on a bench, their faces relaxed and content. This was what she had dreamed of, a neighborhood where everyone felt seen and supported, where hope wasn't a rarity but a shared resource. Later that night, as Olivia sat in her room, she reflected on everything that had happened since that fateful night. She thought of Mr. Carter, whose generosity had opened doors she never could have imagined. She thought of her mother, whose unwavering support had kept her grounded. And she thought of her younger self, the girl who had once wondered if her dreams were too big for someone like her. She smiled to herself, realizing that her journey was far from over. There was still so much to do, so many lives to touch. But for the first time, she felt ready, not just for the challenges ahead, but for the opportunities to create lasting change. By the time Olivia returned to university for her second year, she had grown more confident in navigating her new world. While the workload was intense and the pressure often overwhelming, she kept reminding herself of why she was there, to make a difference, not just for herself, but for the people and places she cared about most. The Carter Community Center continued to thrive in her absence. Deborah kept Olivia updated with photos and stories, showing her how the programs were expanding and how many lives were being impacted. It was humbling to see how one decision made in the heat of a chaotic moment had blossomed into something so much bigger than herself. One particularly poignant story arrived in an email from Marcus, the teenager who had doubted his abilities in the beginning. "Hi, Miss Olivia," the message read. "I wanted to thank you for everything you've done for us. Because of the coding classes at the center, I just got accepted into a summer internship program for tech students. I don't know if I would have ever believed in myself enough to apply if it weren't for you. I hope I can make you proud." Tears filled Olivia's eyes as she read his words. Marcus's success was proof that the ripples of kindness and opportunity could extend far beyond what she could see. During a break in her second semester, Olivia received a call from Mr. Carter. His familiar, warm voice brought a smile to her face. "How's our future doctor doing?" he asked teasingly. "Trying to keep up with the studying," Olivia replied with a laugh. "How about you? How's everything at the center?" "Wonderful," Mr. Carter said. "But there's something I wanted to share with you. We've been working on a new scholarship program for the kids at the center, something to give them the same kind of opportunity you had. I was hoping you'd help us finalize it when you're back for the summer." Olivia's heart swelled. "Of course, I'd love to help. That sounds amazing." "Good," he said, his voice softening. "You've inspired so many people, Olivia. It's only fitting that your story continues to light the way for others." When summer arrived, Olivia returned home to find that the center was busier than ever. The new scholarship program was already gaining traction, with local sponsors stepping in to support the cause. Olivia spent hours working with Mr. Carter and the scholarship committee, helping to design an application process that would be accessible and fair. "Every kid deserves a chance," Olivia said during one meeting. "It shouldn't just be about the grade, it should be about potential and determination." Her input shaped the program, and by the end of the summer, several students had already been awarded scholarships. The joy on their faces reminded Olivia of how she had felt when Mr. Carter first offered to help her. It was a full-circle moment, one that made all the hard work feel worthwhile. As the years went by, Olivia's connection to her community remained strong, even as she moved closer to achieving her dreams. She graduated from university with honors and was accepted into a competitive medical school, a milestone that brought pride not only to her family but to the entire neighborhood. Dr. Olivia Mitchell, Deborah said one evening, testing out the title with a wide grin. "Has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" Olivia laughed, feeling a mix of excitement and disbelief. "It still feels surreal," she admitted, "but I'm ready. I want to make the most of this chance." Throughout medical school, Olivia stayed in touch with the Carter Community Center. She visited whenever she could, offering workshops on health and wellness and mentoring students interested in careers in medicine. One day, as she walked through the center's bustling halls, she passed a bulletin board filled with photos and clippings. Among them was a newspaper article from years ago recounting the fire that had changed everything. The headline read, "Teen Saves Elderly Neighbor from Fire, Inspires a Community." Olivia stared at the photo of herself, so young, so unsure, and felt a wave of emotion. She had come so far, but it hadn't been a journey she'd traveled alone. The people around her, her mother, her siblings, her neighbors, and Mr. Carter, had all played a part in shaping her path. She turned away from the board, her mind buzzing with new ideas. There was still so much work to be done, and there were so many ways to give back. Years later, as Olivia stood in the community garden that now thrived beside the center, she reflected on how much had changed. The garden, planted by local families, was a symbol of growth and renewal. Children played among the flowers and vegetables, their laughter filling the air. Nearby, Mr. Carter sat on a bench, watching the scene with a satisfied smile. Though he had aged in the years since the fire, his energy and spirit remained as strong as ever. "You've built something incredible here," Olivia said, sitting beside him. "We built it," Mr. Carter corrected, his eyes twinkling. "And it's not finished yet. There's always more to do." Olivia nodded, her heart full. "You were right about something," she said. "Success isn't just about what you achieve, it's about what you give back." "And you've given back plenty," Mr. Carter said, his voice full of pride. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the garden in golden light, Olivia felt a deep sense of peace. Her journey had come full circle, but it wasn't an ending, it was the beginning of something even greater. She had become the change she wished to see in the world, inspiring others to follow in her footsteps. As she looked around at the thriving garden, the bustling community center, and the smiling faces of the people she loved, she knew that the story wasn't just hers. It belonged to all of them. Together, they had proven that bravery and compassion could spark ripples of change, transforming not just a neighborhood, but the future itself. Olivia's story is a testament to the power of courage, kindness, and community. It shows how a single moment, a brave decision made in the face of danger, can ripple outward to transform lives. Her selfless act of saving Mr. Carter not only gave him a second chance at life, but also set in motion a chain of events that reshaped their entire neighborhood. This tale reminds us that heroism isn't about grand gestures or dramatic headlines. True heroism lies in everyday decisions, choosing to care, choosing to act, and choosing to believe in the possibility of change. Olivia's journey teaches us that when we uplift others, we elevate ourselves too. Her life is proof that with support, determination, and a little bravery, even the biggest dreams can come true. But this isn't just Olivia's story. It's a call to action for all of us. It's a reminder that our actions, no matter how small, have the potential to make a difference. Whether it's helping a neighbor, mentoring a child, or simply spreading kindness, and every effort matters. If this story moved you, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Did you find it inspiring? If you thought the story was good, comment with a 1. If you thought it was amazing, comment with a 2. And don't stop there. Share your own stories of courage and kindness in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to make sure you never miss another meaningful story like this one. Join us in celebrating the power of community and the strength we find in each other. Let's keep the conversation going and continue spreading positivity, one story at a time.